Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome, I've been told to say, Edith Humphrey this evening. She has many academic accolades, which are so numerous that I won't even attempt to try to enumerate here. If she wants to give her resume, she can, her CV. But she is a biblical scholar we are blessed to have here in the area. She's a parishioner at St. Nicholas in McKees Rocks. And she's also, which is pertinent to our discussion this evening, a scholar of C.S. Lewis. And so hopefully she'll be able to offer us a reflection, as she has promised, on the mystery of atonement that we find in the stories of C.S. Lewis. And I look forward to hearing it, as well as we'll have some questions and answers afterwards. So God bless and keep us all. And Edith Humphrey will now take it over.
It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be here after the traffic tonight. We didn't know whether we were going to make it or not. So C.S. Lewis is beloved by many Christians because he shows clarity of mind, and he also exudes joy, appealing both to the mind and to the imagination. Though he has written many different kinds of books, both in his own field and as really a layperson in Christian theology, I am especially enthralled with how he presents theological mystery in his fictional works. Tonight I hope to open up especially how he pictures the deep Christian mystery of atonement. Today we often use the word to atone or to make atonement to refer to something that someone does to make up for something that they have done wrong, right? Atone for what they had done. Many of our English Bibles use the word in this way also, to refer to sacrifices offered in the Old Testament to either cover over sin or to turn away God's judgment. And they apply that understanding to Jesus' work on the cross in the New Testament as well. But the English word atonement originally did not refer to the sacrifice or the price paid, but actually to the unity that was brought about. So that there would be an at-one-ment, break down the word, that's not a false etymology, an at-one-ment with God and with other human beings. Tonight I want to use the term at-one-ment or atonement in that sense as a kind of a large umbrella category, a term that explains how God does something about our two great enemies of sin and death, so that we can be at one again. For example, the earliest English Bible, or one of the earliest English Bibles, the King James Version, renders Romans 5:11 this way: "We have joy in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom we have now received the atonement." We receive the atonement, that is, we are now at one with God. So then, how has God responded to our human condition of sin, the disintegration that marks every one of us, and our eventual death, our great brokenness? And how has he made us at one with himself, with each other, and with the rest of creation? The Christian answer is, of course, that he has done this in Jesus Christ, the God-man. But how does God fix our human brokenness? We find in St. Paul's letters different images or stories that have to be taken, I think, all together in order to explain this great mystery. There are at least 8 different ways in which atonement is pictured in the New Testament. And there are other ways that have been suggested by theologians throughout the ages, some good, some not so good. St. Paul often clusters together several ideas or pictures when he speaks about atonement in a single passage, as though one idea were not enough to capture the wonder of it all. He tells us that Christ has engaged in these actions for our sake in order to make us at one with others. Recapitulation, rescue, redemption, representative sacrifice, righteousness, reconciliation, and recreation. That's a lot of ours. So let's take them one by one. For example, he speaks, when he uses the term recapitulation, or the idea of recapitulation, of Jesus retracing the steps of Adam and of the Jewish people in Galatians 4:4 and in other places. Doing a kind of a recapitulation of human and Israelite history, doing it all over again, but right this time, not making the mistakes of Adam and of Israel. He says, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Or in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 13, he speaks of rescue. He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and transplanted us, or moved us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. Or the next verse in Colossians 1 verse 14, he says, in Christ we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And redemption, of course, involves paying a price, buying back a slave or a prisoner, paying the fine. Then, it should be 2 Corinthians, that's why I'm stopping. 2 Corinthians 5:14, my finger must have slipped there. He says that Jesus has made amends for us, and that what we have done, and for what we have done, by giving himself not just as our substitute, but as a representative sacrifice. One died on behalf of all, he says in 2 Corinthians 5. One died on behalf of all, and therefore all have died. So Jesus is the dyer. He's the one who is the true sacrifice, but we are to enter into that action, since he's not simply a substitute, but he's our representative as well. Only his death was strong enough to break the power of death. But we are told also, aren't we, to take up our crosses as an echo of him. So he's not just a kind of a stand-in for us. He's our model whom we follow. He is our representative. And so Jesus says to the sisters in Bethany in John's Gospel, he who believes in me shall never die. Why? Because I've done it for them, for that one as a substitute. But even if he die, he shall live. Right? And yet you shall follow the path of death and resurrection that I've laid down. He says it both ways. So far then we have recapitulation, rescue, redemption, and representative sacrifice. But there's more. Western theologians stress Paul's language of righteousness or justness. For example, in Galatians 3 and verse 24, Paul says, and Western theologians stress this passage, the law was our custodian until Christ came, watching over us, that we might be righteous. Could mean declared righteous, it could mean made righteous, that we might be righteous because of faith. And then there's also atonement as reconciliation. But all these things are from God, who in Christ reconciled us to himself. Back again to 2 Corinthians 5. You see the clusters in that chapter. St. John Chrysostom explained, and what did this mediator do, this reconciler do? He did the work of a mediator, the work of a reconciler, for it is as if two have been turned away from each other, and since they were not willing to talk together, another one comes and puts himself in the middle, loosens the hostility of each of the two, and this is also what Christ did. And finally, there is the wonder of recreation. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, we're back in 2 Corinthians 5 again, there is a new creation, or he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. Well, we could find traces. We're actually getting to Lewis now. We could find traces of all these pictures, all of them, in the work of C.S. Lewis. But I want to look at specifically 4 tonight, and 2 in particular. I want to look at representative sacrifice, at rescue, at the work of reconciliation, and at recreation, or the new creation. Sacrifice is seen very clearly in Lewis's very well-known The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Of course, this is the story of Narnia being freed from an enemy, but it also traces the story of the Pevensey children. As Aslan is coming to deliver his country from the clutches of the White Witch, there is a complication. There is the treachery of Edmund. Despite the love and the strength of Aslan, and the fact that the White Witch has stolen Narnia, she has a claim on Edmund because of the very nature of treachery or of sin. So the first major hurdle, Edmund's estrangement from those who are on the right side of the battle, has to be jumped. And Aslan accomplishes this by agreeing with the White Witch to his own sacrifice on the stone table. In anticipating his reparation, his repairing of things on behalf of Edmund, Lucy says this: "I have the most horrible feeling, as if something were hanging over us. Something about Aslan. Either something dreadful is going to happen to him, or something dreadful that he's going to do." Lucy puts into Narnian language the prayer that we have at the Eucharist on the night when Christ was given over, or rather gave himself to death. The same two things are going on here. Something must be done for and about Edmund, because if he's not delivered to the White Witch, who has a right to kill traitors, all Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and in water. Lewis here reflects on the old tradition of some fathers of the church that a price must be paid to the devil for sin. But in the story, he also acknowledges, like the fathers, that this is a problem because the devil doesn't really have anything owed to him, nor does this White Witch. The witch then in the story is scorned for thinking of herself as a queen when she is really just an executioner. Redemption, the paying of a price by death, is a dark mystery that cannot be fully explained. As the Narnians put it, when someone betrays what is good, there is a price that must be paid and that is actually built into reality, into the deep magic of things. Aslan will not work against this, but he can and does work within it. And so he meets the mockery and the insults and the death on the stone table, knowing something that the White Witch does not. He says, after all is said and done, there is a magic deeper still, which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time, but if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in the traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backwards. So Aslan, having compassion with Edmund, takes his place, and reality then is not compromised, but both treachery or sin and death are defeated by what he does. Edmund's release is accomplished then by a sacrifice for his betrayal made by Aslan, who stands in for him. Lewis cannot really stress, though, the representation part of the sacrifice, because lions are not children, and they don't make a natural representative for them. But Aslan is willing, not merely as a substitute, he's willing to do this, and he stands with Edmund and with Narnia, for this is his world. Later, too, we're going to hear of Edmund's own sacrifice for the cause, in which he almost dies, actually. And there is also this delightful vignette that emphasizes Aslan's absolute solidarity with the Narnians. So that's actually from the first book when he's creating them, but think of him in solidarity with them just generally. One of the characters, also a lion, says, "Did you hear what he said? Us lions." That means him and me, us lions. That's what I like about Aslan. No standoffishness. Us lions. That means him and me. Aslan has to give him some work to steady him up because he's just so giddy about this. Well, Aslan's humility is seen both in sacrifice and in how he approaches the Narnian characters. And so there is a true at-one-ment for Edmund too, with both Aslan and with his siblings and with the rest of Narnia. Now, Western readers understand this instinctively, this idea of Aslan on the table and his connection with Jesus' passion. And so do Orthodox, because the center of our divine liturgy, with the Lamb, reenacts or brings us back to what happened on Calvary, while also bringing us forward to the final banquet And it does not forget all the other actions of the God-man, his incarnation, his ascension, and so on, but there's a focus upon the crucifixion and what was accomplished there. But I suspect that Orthodox hearts sing more naturally with the following passages in the book that go beyond what happens on the stone table, where Aslan, full of vigor, defeats the White Witch in battle and delivers those beings that have been petrified by her wand, who are there in the castle courtyard. Her power is broken, and life is restored to those who have been enslaved, just as Christ trampled down death by death and brought the prisoners out of Hades. The importance of Aslan's rescue in the castle of the witch is signaled by one of the girls who says, "Hush, Aslan is doing something." And so Aslan breathes on the petrified, the frozen victims, and soon the courtyard no longer looked like a museum. Right? The prison is gone. The entire house then is searched because, says Aslan, you never know where some poor prisoner may be concealed. As for the battle itself, we're told that it was all over in a few minutes because the witch was no match for Aslan. Hardly a battle at all. So, side by side, we find two major pictures of atonement, mirroring our Christian story, that we are brought into union with God both by representative sacrifice and by our being rescued from death and from evil. Like Scripture, Lewis uses more than one picture, and like fathers like St. John Chrysostom, the Golden Mouth, as well. This is true elsewhere in the Narnian Chronicles. The silver chair tells of a prince who has been imprisoned, and he's been lost in the underground. He's forgetful of the land, of the sun above, and in this story he's rescued. It's all instigated by Aslan, but he's helped by others. And then at the end of this wonderful adventure, there is this absolutely beautiful vignette that I would like to read some of it to you, about how Aslan restores life to King Caspian, who's beloved of the children and who has died in the Narnian world. Then the children saw that they were once more on the mountain of Aslan, high up above and beyond the end of the world in which Narnia lies. But the strange thing was that the funeral music for King Caspian still went on, though no one could tell where it came from. They were walking beside the stream, and the lion went before them, and he became so beautiful, and the music so despairing that Jill did not know which of them it was that filled her eyes with tears. Then Aslan stopped, and the children looked into the stream, and there, on the golden gravel of the bed of the stream, lay King Caspian, dead, with the water flowing over him like liquid glass. His long white beard swayed in it like water weed, and all three children stood and wept. Even the lion wept, great lion tears, each tear more precious than the earth would be if it were a single solid diamond. And you'll notice that Eustace looked neither like a child crying nor like a boy crying and wanting to hide it, but like a grown-up crying. At least that is the nearest she could get to it. But really, as she said, people don't seem to have any particular ages on that mountain. "Son of Adam," said Aslan, "go into that thicket and pluck the thorn that you will find there and bring it to me." Eustace obeyed. The thorn was a foot long and sharp as a rapier. "Drive it into my paw, son of Adam," said Aslan, holding up his right forepaw and spreading out the great pad towards Eustace. "Must I?" said Eustace. "Yes," said Aslan. Then Eustace set his teeth and drove the thorn into the lion's pad, and there came out a great drop of blood, redder than all the redness that you have ever seen or imagined, and it splashed into the stream over the dead body of the king. At the same moment, the doleful music stopped, and the dead king began to be changed. His white beard turned to gray, and gray to yellow, and got shorter and vanished altogether, and his sunken cheeks grew round and fresh, and the wrinkles were smooth, and his eyes opened, and his lips and eyes both laughed, and suddenly he leaped up and stood before them, a very young man, or a boy. that's Eustace, was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, even trying to get it all off himself. So I just lay flat down on my back to let him do it. The very first tear he made into the skin was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of having the stuff peel off. Well, he peeled that beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done it myself the other 3 times, only that hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more novelly looking than the others had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I had been. And he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I'd no skin on. And he threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. And after that, it became perfectly delicious. And soon I started swimming and splashing, and I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I turned into a boy again. Just lost our picture. So, only Aslan can undragon Eustace. In the backstory is the compassion and the strength of the lion who has died already for Eustace's cousin, Edmund. And we've heard that. And Edmund is in the story and is going to talk to Eustace about the dealings that he had with the lion as well. But Eustace also agrees. It's done by Aslan, but Eustace must participate, at least passively. And he suffers the surgery, he's washed in the pool, and he's made into a boy again with brand new clothes. You'll notice that here also, even more explicitly, though we had water in the other scene with Prince Caspian, with King Caspian, God's action is associated with the sacrament of baptism. The other sacrament, the Eucharist, is suggested in that wonderful scene at the very end of the same story where the children meet a lamb. And this lamb offers to them a meal of roasted fish and then reveals himself to be Aslan. Again, and I think this is my last actual quotation. I think this is so beautiful. It bears here. Come and have breakfast. Go. Come and have breakfast, says the lamb in its sweet, milky voice. Then they noticed for the first time that there was a fire lit on the grass and fish roasting on it. They sat down and ate the fish, hungry now for the first time in many days. And it was the most delicious food that they'd ever tasted. Please, lamb, said Lucy, is this the way to Aslan's country? Not for you, said the lamb. For you, the door into Aslan's country is from your own world. What, said Edmund, is there a way into Aslan's country from our world too? There is a way into my country from all the worlds, said the lamb. And as he spoke, his snowy white mane flushed into tawny gold, and his size changed, and he was Aslan himself, towering above them and scattering light with his mane. Oh, Aslan, said Lucy, will you tell us how to get into your country from our world? I shall be telling you all the time, said Aslan, but I will not tell you how long or short the way will be, only that it lies across a river. But do not fear that, for I am the great bridge builder. And now come, I will open a door in the sky and send you to your own land. Please, Aslan, said Lucy, before we go, will you tell us when we can come back into Narnia again, please? Dearest, he said, you and your brother will never come back to Narnia. Oh, Aslan, they both said together in despairing voices. We're 2 old children, and you must begin to come close to your own world now. It isn't Narnia, you know, sobbed Lucy. It's you. We shan't meet you there, and how can we live never meeting you? But you shall meet me, said Aslan. Are you there too, sir? Said Edmund. I am, said Aslan, but there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. This is the very reason for which you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. Well, there's an awful lot going on there. But what we do see is that there is this other sacrament, the Eucharist, that is suggested, the wonderful scene at the end of the story, where the children meet a lamb who offers them this meal of roasted fish, reminding us at the end of John's Gospel. And he reveals himself not just to be a lamb, which he is, but also the lion. The lion lamb recalls that past the morning, the sacrifice and the rescue of Christ, who gives himself to us in the Eucharist. And he speaks of the river of death, about following him through this to life, and about how he is the great bridge builder. And it may be helpful to remember that the Latin word for bridge is pons, and so it's as though Jesus, Aslan, I will do that all the time, Aslan is there saying, I am the great pontiff, I am the great priest, I am the great high priest who will build a bridge and reconcile, but also will stand between you and the one who's called in the story the emperor over the seas. Lucy asks, how can we live never meeting you? But she's told they will meet again and know who he really is. Jesus is the true high priest who knows our infirmities and will bring us to the Father. And that is what Lucy and Edmund have to actually learn in their own country, not just through fiction. And so Aslan tears the blue wall of the sky, opening up a door for them so that the children might know him better in their real world. We might be reminded of the words of St. Athanasius, who spoke of how Jesus, by hanging on the cross in air during his crucifixion, made a way for us. He says it was quite fitting that the Lord suffered this death on the cross. For thus being lifted up, he cleared the air of the malignity both of the devil and the demons of all kinds, as he says, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven and made a new opening of the way up to heaven. So all this is very fascinating because it gives us an idea of how Lewis thought story or images could prepare people to come to know God himself, to understand theology better. They planted a seed that could grow. The world of the story can put something in our hearts that will grow as we come to understand the teaching of the apostles more and more, and more deeply and more deeply. Finally, we can think about the very last story, the last battle, where the new creation, Aslan's new and true world, is accessed through what? A stable door. So far, we've seen Lewis stressing the death and the resurrection of Jesus. But here, and also the ascension, because we have them going up to the high mountain of Aslan in that silver chair story. But here he points to the nativity and to the incarnation. Like the fathers then, Lewis sees the entire life of Christ as figuring in our atonement. Not just the crucifixion, but what happened at that stable, when, as Lucy says, in our world too, a stable once had something inside it that was bigger than our whole world. And we Orthodox would add, so did the womb of the Theotokos that became more spacious than the heavens. Through the stable they go then to find a vast new creation on the other side in which they have a part. Well, I hope I haven't killed the story or reduced the mystery by pulling on these strands. But when you go back to read the stories by yourself or with children that you love, see how they're all woven together to give us hope for atonement, rescue, representative sacrifice, recreation, and reconciliation, and just enjoy them. Are you ready to do some hard work? We're going to go on and do some hard work now. I don't imagine how many have read till we have faces. Okay, you don't have to have read it. Unfortunately, there's going to be some spoilers, but that's okay. The book can stand spoilers. We're going to go on to this adult story till we have faces, where Lewis does for educated readers what he has done for children. He tells a story, pulling on mythology, as well as producing a plot that's full of suspense, and he joins those two things together. And then he hints at its connections with the biggest narrative of eternity. That is the story of the God-man in our world, Christian stories. It's not an easy book, but it's well worth the effort. Lewis stresses atonement in the story by means of two interlocking stories of the two major characters, the royal daughters, Orwell and Psyche. And Psyche's name, of course, means the soul. So that should give you the hint that part of what we're going to see is something about the human soul. The two sisters live in a fictitious land, a pagan land, set on the outskirts of the Greek lands, a more classically educated society. Neither the old pagan ways nor her philosophical education that she's had as a child are satisfying for Orwell, the eldest daughter, as she deals with the changes and the tragedies and the evil of daily life. Instead, she finds herself caught up between the high but pat theology of her Greek tutor or teacher, the fox, and the deep but dark theology of her own native land, where an evil fertility goddess and her son, the shadow brute, are immortal monsters whose wrath must be put away by sacrifice, sometimes every year. The conflict comes to a head when Orwell's beloved younger sister, Psyche, is sacrificed to the shadow brute, according to the religious rituals of Glome, the country, in order to bring rain upon the land. Psyche goes willingly. Yes, because of love for her people, but also because she longs for the divine world. Orwell is heartbroken and cannot accept either the rational or the pagan explanation for Psyche's sacrifice. She knows that she's spiritually blind, that she can't see things, but she's also furiously angry with the gods, and she rages against them from the beginning almost to the end of the book. So she starts to write a book, hoping, like Job, that the gods will answer someday her complaints. Meanwhile, she serves as a self-denying and strong queen, even while, as readers, we see her dreadful character flaws, and they are many, and we see the distorted state of even her love for others. For Psyche, for example, it's a grabbing, kind of seizing kind of love. After Orwell faces these weaknesses, the story comes to a shocking but mysterious conclusion. Well, I've spoken as if all the book is about Orwell's self-awareness and inner growth, but it isn't. Instead, it's first about Psyche and Orwell as surprising Christ figures. Very surprising for female characters, but it works somehow. Their gender is dictated both by the Psyche myth that Lewis is using, but also by the biblical and also the pagan idea of marrying a god. So they stand for themselves, for the soul, the human soul, but they also somehow stand for the one who gives sacrifice. We'll see this in a moment. He could simply have the story of at least two women representing types of human beings, but instead he makes it very clear that we're to be thinking about the Christian ideas of atonement. So immediately we see Psyche's function as a Christ figure. As an infant, she's described as flawless, and she's suspected to have divine blood. She becomes the sacrifice on the tree, the blessed and the cursed, the beautiful one given up for the many. All these are phrases from the book. The one who voluntarily goes to death, giving up her life that she may save it and the life of others. She is the beloved and the blessed, loving all manner of brutes, winning the hearts of everyone, well, nearly everyone. And eventually she's believed to have healing powers as she takes the illnesses of others upon herself. Like Jesus, she's betrayed by one of her own sister, a third one, Redeval, and she is rejected as the accursed by those who once called her blessed. She's selected by the priest as the necessary offering, fit, the only one fit to die for the people. Her story is told with exquisite timing. There's a powerful foreboding mode. Lewis uses Christian echoes like, "For hours she touched in healing. I saw her growing paler and paler. Her walk became a stagger. Then they called out, 'The accursed, the accursed. She made herself a goddess.' Then that's the holy road, the way that they took the blessed." And finally, Psyche describes her own ordeal after the fact, when she was waiting for the God to come. And she describes it both in terms of atonement and in terms of rescue. The only thing, she tells her sister, that did me any good was hardly a thought, and very hard to put into words. There was a lot of Fox's philosophy in it, that's the teacher, things he says about the gods or the divine nature, but it was mixed up with things that the priest said too, things about blood and the earth and how sacrifice makes the crops grow. I'm not explaining it very well. It seemed to come from somewhere deep within me, deeper than the part that sees pictures, deeper than fears and tears. It was shapeless, but you could just hold on to it or let it hold on to you. Then the change came. I was so thirsty, and at last I saw him. Psyche then evokes the sacrificial story of atonement with which Western Christians are particularly familiar. In talking about the book, though, rather than reading it, I can't convey how this bachelor Lewis manages to really evoke the life of female characters. The thing lives. It's not just symbolic. He has this uncanny ability to show the internal life of these female characters without psychologizing. Lewis's book is about these women, but it's also about how we are meant to gain real faces or robust personhood, and how this happens through different kinds of atonement. Well, through these sisters, Lewis compels us to think deeply about the Christian teaching on atonement too, and to recognize that everything is not perfectly clear for us. In order to show the otherness, the strangeness of Christian teaching, he contrasts Greek philosophy, which he likens to clear water, over against the pagan mysteries. Where is it? There we go. The pagan mysteries of Psyche's land, which he likens to blood. The tutor Fox has introduced Orwell to the bright light of Greek reason, and he insists that Psyche's sacrifice on the tree cannot really have turned away the divine anger or brought about rain, because it doesn't work that way. He's a philosopher after all. Instead, the saving rain, he said, came by chance, and she was really just rescued by some odd man who took her away. For this teacher, the gods never intrude into the ways of humankind. They are unmoved by sacrifice. Now, some will recognize that the Fox has been influenced by Stoic ideas about the material world and the Epicurean idea that we are separated from the gods and they don't have any interest in us. Fox tells Orwell to dismiss the idea that what Psyche did was an atonement. That doesn't really happen. But Orwell has another conversation partner, her right-hand man, a very pagan man named Bardia, and for him the world is enchanted. For him, the dark goddess Ungit and her son, the Shadow Brute, are fearful, and actually being married to the Shadow Brute and being eaten by the Shadow Brute are the same thing. These two friends of Queen Orwell, Fox and Bardia, offer different explanations as to what has happened to Psyche. And actually both are right and both are wrong. They remind us of the apostles' words that the gospel is folly to the Greeks and a scandal to the Jew. For the Fox, Psyche's sacrifice is folly. It shouldn't have happened. For Bardia, it is powerful, but it's horrifying because she met this horrible deity. Lewis is here playing, I think, a dangerous game. After all, the Fox's explanation casts doubt not only on the pagan myths, but also on our too glib acceptance of the Christian cross. We glimpse God in a dark mystery on Holy Friday, but why the cross? Why death to undo death? Why didn't God just do it? But that's not our story, is it? Well, we might be tempted simply to accept the Fox's dismissal of the pagan ideas. But in fact, the story will not let us do that. Psyche, we learn, really is at one with the one that she thought was the Shadow Brute, but is actually a glorious God. Some of you might remember back in Lewis's Mere Christianity, that he said when we encounter Jesus, we have to think that either he's a madman or a liar or a god. Well, Orwell faces a similar dilemma here with regards to the atonement. Why is sacrifice a necessary part of the story? Psyche's sacrifice, was it folly? Was it a scandal? And so Orwell faces this choice unless there is a third alternative. And so she says to herself as she's thinking, anything might be true. I'm among marvels I do not understand. I must go carefully. And so Orwell fights with herself, but eventually she does turn away from the idea that the god might be good. And she covers her face, wearing a veil to hide her ugliness, physical ugliness, not just her internal ugliness. And all this comes to a dramatic climax when just after she's become queen, now we get to the second story, she hears outside in the darkness a sound. And she thinks it's her sister Psyche weeping as she wanders through the world. As she leaves the castle, seeking to rescue whomever is weeping, even if it's not her dear sister, whoever it is who's weeping, she plunges her hand into the darkness, and it meets the hand of a young man whom she is destined to rescue by means of hand-to-hand combat with his adversary. In the moments leading up to the fight, she plays alternatively the frightened girl who doesn't want to go into the battle, and the queen who sets her face to go. And the language actually reminds us of what Psyche has done. She says, or the narrator she says, Psyche had gone out that day to heal the people, and so she had gone out that day to be offered to the brute. Perhaps, though this is what the god meant when he had said to me, you also shall be Psyche. I also might be an offering. That was a good, firm thought to lay hold of. So Orwell has heard this possibility that she also could be the true human soul. And she's prepared to do her own kind of sacrifice. And after the battle, this is underscored for us when friends come running up. Fox comes running up, and Bardia comes running up, and they say, blessed, blessed, queen, warrior. So the queen's success doesn't just free the young man that she's fighting for. I won't tell you the whole story there, but she engages in this battle. But it actually delivers her nation from ongoing turmoil and war. Now, as Orthodox, I think many of us who are Orthodox would get this battle imagery better than the imagery of Psyche's sacrifice. But we need both pictures. Lewis won't play that game, nor does St. Paul play that game, nor does St. John Chrysostom play that game. We need both the sacrifice, the representative sacrifice, and the rescue from the kingdom of darkness in order to understand atonement. After all, think about the fact that the battle also has a dark side. It's a battle, after all, and he tramples down death by death. So when we think about atonement, and Lewis does this quite deeply in the third section of this book, we see that victory also has a dark side, just like atonement through sacrifice. It requires death too. And so Orwell cries out, why must holy places be dark places? Well, why? Because we're in the dark, and Christ goes to meet us there. He tramples down death by death. And so in the last part of the book, Orwell undergoes a kind of surgery of the gods, where she is transformed and come to recognize who she herself really is. And during this surgery, she visits Ungit's cave. Now, Ungit is that faceless goddess who sits in the dark and demands the blood of others for her son. And at the time when she goes in, it's the beginning of the new year that is being enacted by the priest. And this priest actually faces the dark in the cave and then battles his way out in a kind of symbolic way into the light, and then the new year is born. in the deep grammar of the book, what the priest does in the cave, and also what Orwell does as in her dream. She digs down and down and down into a pit, prefigures the final triumphant scene. And in this final scene, Orwell is pierced through with divine arrows of love, like the saints of old, unmade and overwhelmed by the arrival of the God. Just as Christ came for the falling and rising of many, think of Simeon's words to the Theotokos, so each one of us undergo a kind of death to self and a resurrection that only is effective because of Jesus' actual death and resurrection. So life then comes by way of death in battle, not just in the sacrifice on the tree. In this book's final section, when the soul of Fox was died, returns to kind of guide Orwell into the land of the gods, we hear that these myths of gloom aren't entirely truthful. So you don't get rain by sacrificing a human being. But they hint at something that is different. And there is a day, far distant day, the fox says, when the gods will become wholly beautiful, or at least we will be shown how beautiful they always were. Now, this is, of course, how we understand the compassionate death and resurrection of our Lord. But it doesn't seem that Lewis intends for us to reject the story of Psyche on a tree, that sacrificial representation of atonement. Rather, it's to understand that sacrifice in terms of the absolute demands of God and how they require our self-offering to Him. And that's underscored when Orwell, when she hears that the gods are going to be shown to be beautiful, she says, do you think that we mortals will find you gods easier to bear if you're beautiful? I tell you that if that's true, we'll find you 1,000 times worse. You're a tree in whose shadow we can't thrive. We want to be our own. We don't want you, even if you're beautiful. At least when you were ugly, we could rail at you. Now what do we do? So then there are challenges to us with the story of atonement by rescue, and not only a scandal connected with atoning sacrifice. There's self-denial and death that plays a key part in what Jesus did and what He calls us to do. And we're drawn into a mystery that is as thick as blood, and a story that is also as bracing as living water. We come to see that our lives can only be lived fully by means of the life of another. And we're offered in exchange true life for this very meager human life that is hardly a life at all, which reminds us that we are not our own and that we need the rescue of that one who has trampled down death by death. Now, as Christians, of course, we know better that God is no shadow group demanding blood from us. He does not drink blood. He does not require human sacrifice. Think back to Isaac and to Abraham. But He sacrifices and He has the victory on our behalf. Still, though, there's a discomfort that remains because God demands all of us, every part of us. And so we have to come as suppliants, saying to Him, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. The wonder of Lewis's story for me is how he brings both Psyche and Orwell together at the end. They're flip sides of the same story, both picturing Jesus' work for us and picturing how every person needs to work out salvation that's been given to them by God in order to become whole. Atonement is necessary because, as one says in the book, all are born into the house of Ungut, of death, must get free of her, or bear Ungut's son, or change. We also hear that mercy is stronger than judgment. Fox says, are the gods just? Oh no, child, what would become of us if they were? There's a question. God's generous reaching out to us is stressed. At the same time, daily human love and toil, the bearing of one another's burdens are significant. And I have a haven't talked a lot about that, but if you read the book, you'll see how the two sisters care for each other. Through intertwined stories and images and characters, I think that Lewis transcends the quarrel that Christians have today with regards to works and grace. Yes, it's all God's work. It's all grace. But yes, we are called to work out our salvation. He knows that even our mundane experiences can teach and form us alongside God's revelation and action. Had Psyche not gone up to the mountain prepared to die, had Orwell not fought as queen to save her people, there would have been no story. Yet they don't change themselves. No, they're transfigured by the one who comes when they meet him in light. Finally, they are given faces. Together, not just separately, but together, they're given life. And they bring to life also what Lewis said on the radio many years before he wrote this story. Your real new self will not come when you are looking for it. It will come when you are looking for him. In the end then, Lewis offers pictures to help us think more deeply about the God-man Jesus, who has brought us into at one-ment with God. His incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, and coming again are moments of that dynamic story that actually occurred and have the power to transform every person. These aren't myths that we're telling. They have the same depth as mythology, but these things happened in space and time and transcend our space and time as well, making, if you like, our world time-full. Sometimes Christians swallow, forgetting that mysteries can be put in different but complementary, matching terms. Orthodox, for example, often think that Western Christians tend to be far too concerned about judgment, about legal questions, about justification, and that even they picture an angry father demanding the punishment of an innocent son. On the other hand, the West worries that Orthodox gloss over sacrifice and justice, with even some Orthodox declaring that in the end all will be saved. They ought not to do that. Let the reader hear and understand. We can help each other here, but even better than debating is for us to hold on to all these stories of atonement. Lewis advises this. You can say that Christ died for our sins. You can say that the Father has forgiven us because Christ has done for us what we ought to have done. You may say that we are washed in the blood of the Lamb. You may say that Christ has defeated death. They are all true. Whatever you do, do not start quarreling with other people because they use a different formula than yours. Why? Because the mystery is to be wondered at, not argued over. And atonement is not just a doctrine. It is a mystery.